All right, I loved Nickelodeon when I was a kid. But what I probably loved more than Nickelodeon was Nick at Night. I love being able to see those old shows. I love Get Smart. I love Mork and Mindy. I love Bewitched. I love seeing all those old shows. But I would say maybe my favorite show of all the shows was the Patty Duke Show. I love the Patty Duke Show. It was cool seeing, Kathy and Patty and, the dynamic of the family and all those different things. The Patty Duke Show was a very feel-good show to watch for a young kid. So one day I'm in middle school, it's a movie day. And, you can't wait for a movie day when you get to middle school, right? Because movie day, lights go out, what does that mean? I get to take a nap. That's what movie day means when you're in middle school. So I'm looking at the beginning of the movie, I'm like, wait a minute, that's Patty Duke. I'm like, I'm in this. Like, I love the Patty Duke Show. We're about to watch the Patty Duke Show. But we weren't watching the Patty Duke Show. We were about to watch Miracle Worker. And this great performance by Patty Duke to tell the story of how arguably the greatest teacher of all time, Annie Sullivan, taught Helen Keller how to communicate. I think Annie Sullivan is arguably the greatest teacher of all time. And I think this title, Miracle Worker, is completely appropriate for what she did. Sometimes today, we think we're doing the impossible. When we take a student that's reading 3 grade levels below, and we bring them up to grade level by the end of the year, that is something to celebrate. But what Annie Sullivan did, most of us would say would be impossible, right? She taught somebody who was blind and deaf how to communicate. She taught Helen Keller, who was blind and deaf, how to communicate. That sounds impossible. The only reason that Annie Sullivan was successful was because she believed that it could happen. If she didn't believe that Helen Keller was capable of learning how to communicate, then she would have never been able to teach Helen Keller, because Helen Keller was giving her hell. She was determined to make sure that Helen Keller was going to learn how to communicate. She was determined to make a breakthrough because Helen Keller gave her hell. Like, Helen Keller would give any kid today a run for their money because Helen Keller was fighting, kicking, hitting. She was frustrated. When you watch this movie, you're not upset with Helen Keller. You're not like, oh, this kid doesn't want to learn. You empathize with her because you're like, man, how are you born with sight and the ability to hear and you lose it? And you're unable to communicate your frustration in a productive way. And so, yes, Helen Keller was frustrated because she didn't have something that all of us from time to time probably take for granted. And so Annie Sullivan, who went through a similar situation herself as a child, was determined to not let Helen Keller go through life unable to communicate. Annie Sullivan wouldn't have been human if it hadn't gone through her mind at some point or another that this might not be possible. I'm sure at some point or another she had her doubts. But what she continued to do was come back. She was determined to push Helen Keller to do what many would think would be impossible. And then she finally got the breakthrough. She got the breakthrough with water. When she made that breakthrough, you couldn't help but be inspired. When somebody irrationally believes in you, you can't help but have a long-term, lifelong relationship with that person. Even if you never see them again, you were always going to be connected. That's the power of what we do as educators. Sometimes one student just needs you to believe in them irrationally and push them to where they never thought they could go. That's what Annie Sullivan did for Helen Keller. If you look at this quote by Annie Sullivan, children require guidance and sympathy far more than instruction. The reality is that instruction is truly secondary. You can have all the knowledge and deliver the best instruction in the world, but if you don't make a connection with the student, that's going to be all in vain. Because until you make that connection, and until they truly believe that you believe in them, and that you believe that they can learn, then you're never going to be able to get the instruction that you have into that student's mind.